Ladies and questioners, Andy here, day 205 of the Inner Winner Show. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, this is also available as a YouTube video. Hi, YouTube. So last time I did one of these videos, I said that I was going to ignore the camera and just do my best to record it as a normal podcast. And then I completely and utterly forgot about that. So this time I've put the camera in a different side. It's kind of like off on the side rather than straight on. So I am going to do my best to pretend that the camera isn't there. So this topic comes from my mentorship group, my private Facebook group that you guys can join. It's called the Winners Club. It's basically an ongoing accountability group, right? And one of the questions or one of the parts of that group is every week I do a live stream where I answer a bunch of questions. Guys give me all the questions and I answer them on a live stream. And this was a question that came up and I really freaking liked this question. And I don't think I did it full justice on the actual live stream. I'm going to have another tackle at it here. And the question was, if you had the opportunity to ask Chris, and so when this guy's talking about Chris, he means Chris from Good Looking Loser, who was essentially like my mentor. For those of you who don't know, like Good Looking Loser was the site I went to beat my approach anxiety, so to be comfortable talking to girls. Basically everything, most of my accomplishments, I can give credit to Chris at Good Looking Loser. So if you had the opportunity to ask Chris questions every week, like we can ask you, as in the people in this private mentorship group, they can ask me questions. What are the first questions that you would ask? And what topics would you really want him to go deep on? I'm pretty task-orientated. I guess I can skip that bit there. Essentially, what sort of things do you think are worth asking now that you have all the experience that you've gained? Are the questions you would ask him in hindsight different from the questions you would ask him when you were in our shoes, as in when you're a newbie? Yeah, so the questions that, this is what I said on the live stream. The questions that I would have asked him as a newbie are obviously going to be radically different to the questions I would ask him now. And I don't even think it's that important. We talked a little bit on the live stream. I don't think it's important that I repeat that here, like the questions that I would ask now. Because questions that I would ask now would be more like, Chris would be more like my peer right now, right? I've been doing this website for like 3 years. This is the 205th podcast I've done. I think I have like 400, maybe that's an exaggeration. I think I have like 300 because I can remember doing 200 articles. That was like 7 months ago. So I'm probably at 300 articles. So I've done like 500 pieces of content, right? Chris would be more like a peer at this point in time. So the questions I would ask him would be more like peer-to-peer questions. So we won't go too much into that. But in terms of what questions do I think would be worth asking him? And another way of looking at this is what questions should you guys be asking me or anyone that you're getting advice from? And so some of the questions that I would have asked him as a newbie were questions that would have made me feel better with some of my insecurities. And that's the main thing we're going to be talking about here. If you're thinking like, what question should I ask Andy or what question should I ask anyone else? Like maybe you're one of my coaching clients or maybe you're in the Facebook group. If you're not in the Facebook group and you'd like to join, I'll leave a link in the show notes below to how you can join that. It's an ongoing accountability group. You can ask me questions every single day. I jump in there, I answer questions. People answer each other's questions as well. There's a weekly live stream. It's a solid group. I definitely recommend joining that group. Absolutely. Anyway, so the questions that I would recommend you guys ask me and the ones that I would have asked Chris were ones like, am I going to make it? Like, do you really think I can make it? And this is, funnily enough, one of the main questions that people ask me when they hit me up for a coaching call, like a one-on-one coaching. The first time we sit down, one of the first freaking questions, or like it will eventually come out that the person will say, do you really think I can make it? Or maybe they'll say, I have doubts as to whether I can make it, or I'm not convinced I can make it, or are you sure everybody can make it? Or I have this perceived flaw or this weakness, like maybe I'm short, maybe I'm Asian, maybe I'm nervous, maybe I'm old. Like, are you sure that someone with that weakness could make it? Like, that question comes up more than any other. Am I going to make it? So that would be the first question that I would ask him, because I had that fear. It wasn't even a fear. It was like I was completely and utterly convinced that I wasn't going to make it. I didn't think I could ever be a player. I didn't think that I could ever live that kind of lifestyle. I didn't think girls would ever actually like me other than really, really obese girls. And so I would probably ask something like that, even though I was pretty sure that I already knew the answer. And funnily enough, I was convinced that the answer would have been no. Like, I'm pretty sure that if I asked that question to Chris, at the time, I was pretty sure if I had asked that question to Chris, he would have said no. Even though, of course he would have said yes, of course you can get laid, Andy. But I was so utterly convinced at that time. I was like, if I could have asked him that, or if I could ask him that, pretty sure he'd say no. Even though we all know he'd say, yeah, of course you can make it, you fucking loser. Just like improve your looks and go talk to a bunch of girls. Stop being a pussy. Another question that I would have asked Chris as a newbie is, can anyone make it, even a loser like me? So can anyone make it? I think that's an important question. And I've talked about that in a few articles. One of them is I can't get laid because. I will leave a link in the show notes below to that if I remember, if I forget. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll make a note right now. Normally when I don't record these as a YouTube video, I can make as many notes as I want because I can pause the recording. It's harder to do it live. So I can't get laid because. So that's an article I wrote, and I'll leave a link in the show notes below to that. Basically going through all the perceived flaws that people have, or the actual flaws that people have. Like maybe you're a short guy. Maybe you're like 5'6", right? Maybe you're 5'4". Maybe you're a freaking short dude. I knew a guy that was like fucking 4'11". There's a great article in Good Looking Loser called "A 5'1" Guy Who Gets Laid More Than You." And there are plenty of guys that are really short. They get laid. You will have to try 10 times harder, of course. But the point of this article is, I truly believe that anyone can make it. And Chris from Good Looking Loser used to say the same thing. He said, unless you have some form of like severe disability or severe disfigurement, anyone can get laid. And I would even add the caveat and say, or I would add the extra information and say, even if you have a severe like disfigurement, your face is all fucked up, maybe you got like a facial tumor or some shit, you can go and get cosmetic surgery. Yes, you will have to save up a ton of money to do so. It might take you 3 years to save up the money. But so what? Your progress would just be 3 years slower than everyone else. You will have all sorts of like fucked up mental issues from being ugly or disfigured for your whole life. Of course you will. It will take you longer to get through those, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. Of course you can. Your journey is just going to be a little slower, or there's going to be slightly more hurdles than other people have to go through. So I would have asked that question early on because I didn't know if anyone could make it. Even though he said on his article or on his website, yeah, I think everyone can make it. I would just want to look him in the eyes and say, can everyone make it though? And so if you're, if you have contact with me, if you're doing a coaching call with me, or if you want to join the Facebook group, the mentorship group, and you have a chance to ask me any questions, I would definitely recommend asking some of these questions, especially if these are the questions that kind of bother you. If you think, I'm not sure I can make it, I'm not sure anyone can make it. Another question would be, what is one thing that I should focus on first or focus on the most? Because at the start, I felt lost. And Chris makes it very apparent that your main mission or your first mission should be to lose weight, like to get nice and lean. That matters more than anything else. Then to add some muscle and improve your style, and then go talk to a lot of girls. And there's some overlap in the timelines there. You can be doing all those things at once. You don't have to like do one at a time. He also makes it really apparent that you should be doing career last. And for the most part, I agree with all that timeline. I agree with everything there. I definitely agree that losing weight or losing fat is the absolute first thing you should be doing. Improving your style as well. Obviously, if you're losing a ton of fat, don't go out and buy like 50 different outfits because you're just going to have to replace them once you're leaner anyway. But like, start working on your style. You can buy things like watches and rings and necklaces and stuff like that. You can buy like 1 or 2 outfits and then just aim to replace them as you lose even more weight. So that's the first thing I would focus on. And I very much agree with the idea of leaving your career till last. Absolutely, of course. It's so much easier to handle. It's so much easier to build a career once you've handled your sex life, because you don't feel all these, insecurities and fears about whether women will ever like you or whether you'll always be a loser. Or it's just easier to focus on a career when you have a good sex life, because a good sex life really adds to your life. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of enjoyment. Women bring that feminine energy that makes you want to just go out and crush it hard the next day. Like, women are a brilliant fucking reward. Pun intended, they are a fucking reward. They're a brilliant reward for a really hard day of work. And if you don't have any women in your life, or you don't know how to get laid, or you're at the stage where it's kind of intermittent and you can't really rely on your sex life, you can't get laid whenever you want, it's really hard to dedicate yourself to your career because you're just going to be sitting there sexually frustrated, emotionally frustrated. I think most of us know that this getting laid thing isn't even so much about the lays. It's about knowing that you're a guy who can get laid, knowing you're not a loser, knowing women will like you, knowing that you're valuable. That shit's way more important than actually sticking your dick in a pussy, although that's a hell of a lot of fun as well. So another thing I would ask Chris, or you could ask me, is did you ever have doubts yourself? Now, Chris didn't talk that much about his own doubts. That is something that I've tried to cover a hell of a lot more, especially in articles like I Am Always Full of Doubt. That was an article I wrote. Another one called There Is No Such Thing as Alpha. I'll leave links to, just go and read I Am Always Full of Doubt. I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. That's definitely the best article. I think that's the best article I've written to really get across to you guys that like, I have a hell of a lot of doubts myself. I still do. A hell of a lot of insecurities. I probably always will. I've done a bunch of other articles on that same topic, like imposter syndrome. You can search my website for that. I've done an article on that about how every time I start a new goal, I feel like an imposter. I feel like I can't do this. This isn't me. The most recent one is money, like me building this website, building my career, handling my financial goals. I've definitely felt like, I'm an imposter. This isn't me. I'm not a guy that could ever be rich. I'm supposed to be like poor. I'm supposed to be in debt. Like I'm supposed to be a financial loser. So asking Chris if he ever had those doubts, because he didn't talk about that much. He talked about it in a past sense. Like he said, I used to have doubts, but everything on his website is him being like a strong, masculine guy with his shit together. I think I do a better job. And that's not to say he did a bad job. So maybe I should say I cover that stuff more on my website, these doubts, these insecurities, like the stuff that's in my head. He kind of, when he talks about that stuff, he's talking about it in a past tense. So that would be a question that I would ask. Another is, did you ever think you wouldn't make it? And this is very similar to the first two questions and very similar to the last question. It's basically, did you ever have doubts about whether or not you'd make it? So going a little more specific with it, like, did you ever think that you wouldn't make it or that you would ever quit? And I've talked about this all the time. Of course, I had a million doubts, a million moments where I didn't think that I would make it. I was utterly convinced that there was no way in hell I could ever make it. I wish I had known that from Chris's point of view, though. I wish I had known whether he had those doubts, because he didn't really talk about that much. The next one, in a very similar sort of vein, is, did you ever cry? And I think because I was very emotional, like I didn't cry all the time, but let's say it's hard to put a number on it, but throughout the entire, let's say for the first year of me working on my dating life and my sex life and stuff, my self-improvement, I would have cried probably, I don't know, it's really hard to remember. It's like, it would have at least been 10 times, at least, maybe more than that, maybe like 20 times, like quite a lot. It was at least every couple of weeks, right? And it's not like I was sitting there bawling and just a complete mess, although that did happen a couple of times. It's more just like I'd get so angry and frustrated that like tears would be coming out of my eyes. So I wasn't like sitting there sobbing. Again, that did happen a couple of times, but like most of the time it was just like angry tears and like frustrated tears. And like, I wanted to know that like, I guess I wanted to, another way of phrasing did you ever cry is, did you ever feel over the top emotional? And are my emotions okay? Are these strong emotions I'm feeling okay? And now Chris did cover this in an article called, it was something like, this process will strip you down and force you to face your insecurities. And that was a brilliant article. He basically said everything has to come to the surface when you start working on your self-improvement, when you start trying to get laid, especially when you're dealing with rejection. All of the stuff that you've bottled up and never addressed in your entire life is going to come to the surface, and you have to process it. This whole process is like a counseling session. It's like 15 years of counseling crammed into 1 or 2 years. And if you're doing the approach anxiety program like I did, the program that teaches you like how to talk to girls and hit on girls during the daytime, that's like fucking 15 years of counseling crammed into 3 months. That's insane. You will cry. So I cried during that program more than any other time. And so I guess I just wanted to know, and this is something a few clients ask me, are my strong emotions okay? Are they going to get better over time? Will I always be this angry, this emotional? Will I always care this much? Will I always be this vulnerable? Will I always be this like, pathetic isn't the right word, but like unstable? Vulnerable is probably the best word. Like I was on a knife's edge for the vast majority of the time. And if a girl rejected me, I'd be like, fuck this bitch, how dare she? Why are girls always against me? This is not fair. Like, fuck this stupid bitch. Like, and it's like, bro, all she just said is like, hey, I have a boyfriend or some shit, right? Like, or hey, I don't really want to come over this weekend, or hey, I'm not feeling the chemistry. And I would just get so invested and so upset because I had so much on the line. And so I wanted some reassurance, or it would have been nice to have some reassurance that like, no, that's like normal. It's normal to care this much. It's normal to be this emotionally invested. It's normal to be this unstable. And this is something that a few of my coaching clients will ask me, like sometimes directly. There was even a guy on the forums recently who had a really bad day and he vented, and he's like, man, fuck, like I feel so embarrassed that I vented. And I just said like, man, that's normal. Like, don't stress. Like this, like the emotional pain that you're going through, all the stuff you're having to deal with, there's a reason that most guys don't do what most of us are doing here, right? Like there's a reason the average person doesn't work on his sex life or her sex life. There's a reason the average person doesn't work on their self-improvement. There's a reason the average person doesn't go to the gym. They don't lose weight. They don't stop staring at Netflix and shoving McDonald's into their fucking mouth hole. There's a reason that most people don't do this stuff or get a better career or start their own business. It's because this stuff is hard as hell. It's terrifying. When you start working on it, all of these fears and insecurities and doubts and stuff you haven't processed, it comes to the surface and it forces you to process it. And once you've taken that lid off, once the cat is out of the bag, you've opened Pandora's box. You can't stop. Like, especially when stuff from your childhood comes up or stuff that you've always repressed or those thoughts that you've always had about yourself, like I'm a loser, I'll always be a loser. Once you start tackling that shit, you can't stop. And so this is really, really, really goddamn difficult. There's a reason most of us don't do it, or most people don't do it. And so, of course, you're going to be overly emotional. Of course, you're going to be unstable. This is hard shit, right? Like, no one said this was easy. I'm never going to lie to you guys and say this is easy. Like, self-improvement is hard. Getting laid is hard. I never on my website said it was hard. Sorry, I never on my website said it wasn't hard. I said everyone can do it. I said it's very doable. I said you only need to take baby steps every day. You don't need to be perfect. It's okay to be a fuck up. It's okay to be insecure, but I never, ever, 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 ever have ever said it's easy. I've said it's very doable. I've said it's not impossible, but yeah, it's hard. Another question that I would ask him is, what is the meaning of life? And this isn't me just asking some big, goofy, silly question that no one can ever really know the answer to. It's not some big, like, philosophical jerk off or something. I guess I wanted to know, I would have wanted to know from his point of view, like, what is your meaning of life? So maybe a better way of phrasing it would have been like, Chris, what's your meaning of life? What do you want from life? What do you want to, when you're at the end of your life, what do you hope you've achieved? What do you want your life to be about? What's the theme of your life? What things do you want to accomplish? What kind of person do you want to be? Those kind of questions. Because I guess I didn't have a clue myself. And it would have been nice to hear from someone else what the meaning of life, what their meaning of life was. Obviously, everyone's going to have a different meaning of life, right? We're all different people with different hopes and dreams and likes and dislikes. And it would have been nice to just know like what he wanted from life. And this is something that I've talked about a little bit. Maybe I've never directly said it, so I guess I can just say it here. Maybe I'll do a podcast at some point on what is my meaning of life, because I've done podcasts on what is the meaning of life and like how to be happy. But my meaning of life is something like, I want to learn as much as I possibly can about everything, which is another way of phrasing, I just want knowledge about everything. I almost don't care what I'm knowledgeable about. I just want knowledge. Maybe I'm like autistic in that way. I just want to know everything. I want to understand processes. I want to understand how things fit together. I want to know as much as I possibly can before I die. I just have this hunger and this thirst for knowledge. That's part of the reason why my website exists, why I encourage you guys to do your own experiments and stuff like that. Pretty much everything I've learned about Tinder and getting laid and all that has been me just like running experiments and trying to learn more. So my meaning of life, my biggest meaning of life is to learn as much as possible. And then the second one is to leave the universe better than I found it. Like when I die, the world has to be slightly better. It's not going to be, I'm not going to fucking be some Elon Musk. I don't think I ever wanted to be that. I don't think I would like to be that. But I want to know that my life was productive, that other people were positively influenced, that I created something that will go on to influence other people, which is all ways of saying I want the world to be better than I found it. That's why one of my biggest missions with girls, and I talk about this all the goddamn time, is I want to leave girls better than I found them. That's exactly the phrasing I use. I have an article on that. I don't think I've released that article yet, have I? I'm still writing that. But leaving girls better than I found them, leaving the world better than I found it, and learning as much as I possibly can. Those are my meaning of lives. Yours will be different. Some of you might have the same meaning of life as me, and you're like, fuck, Andy, that's me as well. I'm sure a lot of you will. There's a lot of people that want to leave the world better than they found it, even just a tiny bit. I think that's like a pretty general human thing. Probably like 75 to 90% of people want that. They want the world to be a little bit better. So there you go. So the whole point of this was not just to like talk about the things I would have asked Chris. I want you guys to apply all those questions either to me or to someone else's website that you follow, or, you know, anyone else that you look up to, or a mentor, or someone, just anyone that you're getting advice from, right? Ask all of the questions that I would have asked Chris, the ones that I just said before. You can ask those of me. If you're in my Facebook group, the mentorship group, it's called the Winners Club, or if you hit me up for coaching or something, I definitely recommend you ask me all the questions I just asked above. Like, ask me all those questions, especially some of the specific ones that pertain to you. Like, am I going to make it? Like, me personally, Andy, do you think, be real with me, be honest with me, do you think I'm going to make it? I'll also say, I want you to ask me about any insecurities you have and whether I had them too, or things that are going on in your head, or maybe some mental issues that you're working through, stuff like that. Because it's very easy to get stuck in your head and not pull yourself out of that and say like, wait, is anyone else going through this shit too? Or is it just me? Am I just fucked up in my own head? So ask me if there's any of those things that I ever went through. And because 9 times out of 10, the answer is like, yeah, dude. Like, especially things like anxiety. People ask me all the time, like, man, like, you know, I'm going through anxiety or I'm having a panic attack. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've had panic attacks. And they're like, what? Really? And I'm like, yeah, like, that's normal, dude. Like, lots of people have anxiety. And sometimes I will tell them some insane thought process I have, and they'll be like, holy fuck, dude, I thought that was only me. I thought that I was the only one that went through that like fucked up, crazy thought process, or like I was having darker and darker, more negative thoughts, and I was spiraling out of control. And then like, you know, I thought I was going crazy. And then I'm like, no, dude, like I do that a lot. I've done that like probably every month. Like I'll have a fucking deep, dark depression or something, or I'll have these like anguished thoughts or stuff like that. So ask me about that, because that makes you feel a lot better if you know someone else is going through it too. You can also ask me if any of my other clients are going through similar struggles to you, or have the same insecurities or mental hurdles as you. Obviously, I'm not going to name names and tell you who the clients are, but I'm going to say like, oh yeah, no, there's this other dude that I'm talking to, or that I'm coaching, and he's like gone through similar, and like, yeah, so like it's not just you. So that definitely helps. Here's a great example. One of my recent coaching clients, I'm not going to say what his background is, but he's from a particular country, right? And he's telling me about how his parents are really like overbearing and shit. And so I say like, oh, like what's your background? And he goes like, oh, my parents are from this country. And I was like, no shit, dude. Like one of my fucking best mates is from there, and his parents are overbearing as well. And I say like, you know, what religion are you? And he says, oh, this. And I say like, fuck, dude, like my mate is. So I end up texting my mate and I say, hey, I've got a coaching client. I'm not going to give you any personal details about him or anything, but he's going through this struggle. What do you think? Like, what's some advice you can give? So my mate, you know, writes a couple of paragraphs. I screenshot that. I text that, or I email that to my coaching client. My coaching client's like, dude, fucking awesome. I feel better that it's not just me. Someone else understands exactly what I'm going through, right? It's not just me. I'm not alone. I'm not the only fucking weirdo having to go through this shit. So ask me about either other clients. And again, I'll keep personal detail. I always keep personal details out of it, names, details, all that kind of stuff. But just knowing one of my other clients or a couple of my other clients are going through it, or that I have gone through it, or that my girlfriend Imogen has gone through it, or that I have friends who have gone through it, like opening up about your insecurities so that I can give you examples. Because I can't think of any time where I've ever gone like, oh, you're the only person I've ever heard who's struggling with that in my whole life. Like that just doesn't happen. There's so much overlap with this stuff, and it really makes you feel better knowing that it's not just you. So another question that you could ask me, and again, it's not just me, it's anyone that you get advice from, or anyone that is your mentor or anything like that. Ask me if I think you're a special case who can't be helped. Ask me for my honest opinion on your chances of making it. And I am always completely honest with this. I've met 2 people so far that I thought like, yeah, to be honest, like you're not going to make it. And I was just honest with them, and I'm like, I'm not going to coach you. Like you're not going to make it. And now a lot of you hearing that will be like, oh fuck, like what if that's me? It's like, okay, here with one of them, it was a guy who was doing really evil shit to girls and to himself. And so I wanted no part of that. And when I say really evil, again, I don't want you guys to worry and be like, fuck, like, what if that's me? What if Andy turns me away or something? It's like, this was like really fucking evil shit. Like cheating on girls, like girls looking him in the eye and saying like, I don't want to do that. And him just like making them do it, like really fucking bad stuff. That was the first guy. And the second guy was a guy who just like blamed everyone else for everything. And I did try to help him a couple of coaching sessions, but after a certain point, I was just like, you don't take responsibility for anything. I don't actually think you want to be helped. I think you want to just make excuses for everything. Every bit of advice or homework I give you, you don't do. Like, there's not much more I can do after that point. If I'm giving you if I'm giving you a plan of action and you don't do it, like, it's game over at that point in time. I got to breeze through this because I got to go in a second. So another question I would ask to me, or I would get you to ask me, is will girls be nice to me? Because that's a lot of guys' fears. And the answer is obviously going to be like, yeah, girls will be ridiculously nice. I can't tell you how many times a guy will be terrified of how girls will react to him. And then he finds out, like, girls are total sweethearts. There's a guy in in the Winners Club right now, in the Facebook group right now, who's just started. He's at the point in the approach anxiety program where he's actually hitting on girls. And he's saying like, hey, you're really cute. And he said like, I can't believe that I'm hitting on cute and hot girls and they're being nice to me. I never would have envisioned that this would happen. So will girls be nice to me? That's a great question. Other questions will be about things you're struggling with. I think we've covered that enough. And the final thing I'll say is particularly ask me questions that make you relate to me more. So ask questions about my own doubts or my fears, like me, Andy, or my insecurities, questions that show you that I'm human too, that I fuck up a hell of a lot too, that I'm not perfect, that I don't have my shit together. It doesn't matter, right? I don't look perfect. I don't sound perfect. My brain isn't perfect. That stuff really doesn't matter. I share a lot of that shit with you on my website and on this podcast or on this YouTube channel already, but I would encourage you guys to specifically ask me for more examples. Like basically, hey, Andy, can you tell me how much of a fuck up you are? And then I can happily just literally list off like 10 ways I fucked up today, right? 10 ways I'm a lazy piece of shit. Especially if it's stuff that you're insecure or struggling with. Because a lot of the time you look at the people that you idolize or the people whose advice you're taking, however you want to phrase it, and you say, you know, they're so far ahead of me. Of course that guy can get laid, right? Of course that guy can build a website and make money. Of course that guy can coach other people. Of course he can do this. Of course he can do that. Because look at who he is, right? It's almost like you will benefit from me bringing myself down a peg. Like me showing you that like, no, I'm a fuck up. Like I'm not what you think I am. I'm really not. Like I'm not that far ahead of you. Like don't stress. I'm probably like 3 years ahead of you. You could easily catch up. Hell, you can catch up 80% of the way in 1 or 2 years. You could get 80% of where I am in 1 or 2 years. Of course you could. Like most of you can right now, unless you're like obese, and then it will probably take 2 years. So any of those questions that bring me down a peg, that make me more relatable, ask as many of those questions as you can. Like literally ask me, hey, can you please relate? Can you please make yourself more relatable? Tell me how much of a fucking loser you are. And yeah, I'll happily oblige. Because I want to oblige with that shit. Like I've never had an ego with that stuff. It always kind of irks me that a lot of advice givers, especially in the manosphere, man, they have this idea that they have to keep up this perfect, idealized alpha exterior. And I've just never wanted to run that PR game. I don't really give a shit what... I shouldn't say I don't give a shit what you guys think of me, because I do. Obviously I do. But I don't care that much. Like if you guys thought I was a fag or something, I'd be like, whatever, like fuck you. I don't really care. So I've never really been that bothered about impressing you. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. And so I'm happy to share all my weaknesses and my flaws and my fuck ups. And I think it makes me more relatable. It helps you more. That's probably the main reason I do it. Because I know if I tell you that I'm a fuck up, if I share all my flaws, if I share my doubts and insecurities, you'll be like, oh shit, he's just like me. Like we can do this together. And yeah, so we'll leave it there. Again, if you want to join the Winners Club, which is the private Facebook group where you can ask me questions, we also do a weekly live stream, all that kind of good stuff. I will leave a link in the show notes below, or you can just go to my website and search for the Winners Club. Definitely join that. I definitely recommend you guys join that. All the guys that are in it absolutely get. I've got some testimonials on the sign up page on my website. Everyone's getting a ton of shit out of it. It's a good group of dudes. Those dudes absolutely have each other's back, and I'm obviously in there as well. So join up. Definitely recommend you guys do that. Adios. Peace, bitches.